Welcome back to the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Ray Guo. In this segment, we will continue our conversation on U.S.-Taiwan and cross-strait relations, and we're going to start off with an angle on domestic politics and its impact on cross-strait relations. Bi-khim, we had a so-called 3-in-1 election for county magistrate and councilor and also heads of local townships back on December 5th, 2009. And in this, election, at least the local interpretation was that the opposition DPP done fairly well, and beyond a lot of people's expectations. How would you then rate the performance of the DPP in the December 5 election?
Well, indeed, we did make significant gains.
Okay.
The voter proportion of what the DPP did gain was higher than ever historically in local elections, both in the magistrate and the city council elections as well as the township elections.
And so it's gone over 45%.
Over 45%, yes. The best we did in 1997 was at 43%.
Okay.
So we were at a historic high, but at the same time we have to be careful about interpreting the outcome because we feel primarily it reflected public disappointment over the government's performance, general disappointment over economic performance, and also the government's lack of sensitivity to respond to the needs of the people at times of crisis, such as the August flood that we experienced, and the general inability to communicate with the public over major policy decisions, I think has affected the credibility of the government. Now, disappointment in the government does not necessarily translate into confidence over the opposition. However, it did create a situation where the public was willing to give the DPP another chance, or at least a more balanced political situation. We know that last year the DPP failed dramatically in both the legislative and the presidential election. So that within the institutional framework of Taiwan politics, we've seen a one-party dominated political framework, and the DPP has been extremely weak within the institutions over the past year or so. So this is kind of a public sentiment to want to see greater balance in our politics, to see a stronger opposition, and so it's a willingness of the people to give us a chance. But we have not interpreted this as a major victory. It's simply a first step to our party's recovery. We had a dramatic defeat last year, and we are simply getting out of the ICU, the intensive care unit, and struggling to get back on our feet again, and we will have a lot more challenges this coming year.
Yeah, I think Bi-khim, you said a very key point, which was that maybe people, the voters, were dissatisfied with government performance, but does that necessarily translate into added confidence, in the opposition? If that is, the question that's confronting the opposition, what do you think, in your capacity as, a long-time participant of, domestic politics, what do you think the DPP needs to do to restore that confidence further, to make that crossover into a viable alternative to the ruling KMT?
Well, indeed, as our chair, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, expressed over the New Year Day a few days ago, her hope for the new year is that the DPP could again become a trusted party, that we can restore the confidence of the people. And of course that involves developing a viable policy as well as the ability to articulate our policy positions to the public in the way that the people would have confidence that we would be a better government on the central level than the KMT. It would of course also involve continuing the challenge against the policies that we find inappropriate that the government is pursuing right now, and demanding greater clarification, demanding greater transparency, playing the role of a very responsible opposition, and gradually move ourselves back into a position where we could be trusted to run the show.
Well, I'm going to now turn over to Deputy Minister Chao, but I'm going to ask you this question in your private capacity as a professor of political science and also a longtime observer of cross-strait relations and Taiwan's domestic politics. Professor Chao, were you surprised by the outcome of the election, especially given the fact, as you mentioned earlier in the program, that there was so much progress made in cross-strait relations, specifically in terms of normalizing economic and transportation relations. And were you surprised that the voters in general were not happy with the government's performance?
Well, let me put it into perspective. Last year was the worst year in the past 6 decades in terms of our economic development.
Yes.
That was, it was global meltdown in the financial sector. I think no country was able to escape out of that, trouble crisis. Taiwan had the record unemployment people, and the economic growth rate was the worst in, like I said, in the last 6 decades. Yet, of course, we had another huge typhoon America. The damage done by the typhoon was another unprecedented trouble to the government. Yet, I don't think the outcome of the elections were all that bad for the ruling party. The party, after all, won 12 out of 17 seats for the mayor and the county commissioners and mayors. That was extremely
very impressive.
Good.
Yes.
Not to mention, if you would include another seat, won by the independent seat, the Hualien, this is a Pen Blue candidate as well. So that would put the overall vote for the ruling party close to 54%. Well, this is I think this is outstanding. Not to mention the 5 newly merged huge metropolises. The ruling party has more support in all those big city areas, and those cities did not, they weren't there to contest. So I don't think it was a bad election for the ruling party. Of course, if you are talking about cross-strait relations, we had a great year, and poll after poll, people would point to cross-strait relations as the area that the government has done the best.
Okay.
So if I'm sure there are some people who are disappointed at the government, but I don't think the cross-strait relations is one of those areas.
And now I'm going to turn to Alan. Alan, I haven't forgotten about you, and I'm going to ask you the same, question along the lines of the December 5 election. As far as you know, and your own, reading of the materials that we gather, that how would Beijing interpret this result? This is the first island-wide contest between the KMT and the DPP since the 2008 presidential election in March. How would they interpret the results?
Well, it's an important but somewhat difficult question to get through. But I think that I'm not sure they would see it necessarily as so much island-wide. There's an element, I think, that Bi-khim Hsiao pointed out, the disappointment or frustration, and I think that's general, and we see that in all sorts of polls. I would agree that the DPP is being wise not to view this as an overwhelming victory, because I don't think it was, but it was certainly a good performance. But I think that the mainland is likely to look at the economy, at the projections. I think they would disagree with what was said earlier about the fact that their economic relations with Taiwan had not been helpful. I think that in the absence of those relations, their estimate would be, in fact, the situation in Taiwan would have been considerably worse. So I think that their sense would be, and their certainly, I would have to say, their hope would be, that as the economy recovers, which I think most people expect, that this sense of discontent or frustration may ease. They have hopes, obviously, for better relationships themselves with the DPP, but at the present time, that doesn't seem like it's on the table. And so I think that they continue to hope that President Ma succeeds and that they're seen as a contributing factor to that.
Okay. And Steve, how would your fellow academic observers of cross-strait relations and U.S.-China relations view the election outcome and its likely impact on President Ma cross-strait policies?
It's a local election. They were a series of local elections. They were what we would call in the States off-year elections.
Okay.
The ruling party never does well in any democratic system in off-year elections. And I think, as Bi-khim Hsiao said, it reflected what one might expect.
Okay.
And that is, there was a slogan in the States, I think 25 years ago,
yes,
that went something to the effect, it's a time for a change. Okay. And voters, when things are not going well, want to change.
Okay.
And incumbency is very hard.
Okay.
And I'm not necessarily convinced, just to throw this out, that the Kuomintang has managed its incumbency very well in the last 2 years.
Professor Chao, would you think that this is a momentum changer for the KMT, for the government? 30 seconds.
I don't think so. In order for the opposition to become a ruling party again, I think the opposition party needs to have a policy, which they don't. And voters are not going to vote for a party which has no policies. They have no policies, but they have no policy. I mean, all the policies are no to our policies, which is not a,
So you still don't think the opposition has become mature enough to become a viable alternative to the KMT?
It will be a long shot.
Okay. Well, we're going to take another short break on the Taiwan Outlook, and we will come back after 3 minutes, and we're going to talk about the issue that everybody is concerned about, ECFA. I'll see you in 3 minutes.